I tend to shy away from the word satire or the word satirical these days, because satire to me, Willem Kundera spelled this out very clearly in one of his books, where he said that he didn't like satire because it was a thesis art, where you start from a preordained point of view, and the point of the work is to push the readers in the direction of that point of view, which I find these days rather antithetical to, I think, what a novel should do or can do, where I prefer, if I can, to deal in a little bit more of ambiguity and open-endedness and so on. But having, so this novel is not satirical in that sense, in the way that, for instance, Watercolor, I think, could be said to be. But there's a fair amount of detail of contemporary life and a fair number of references to the economic situation of Britain. Yes, that's true. Which I kept out of my previous book, but it was kind of relief to let them back in again in a way, because I felt that I was again doing something that the novel can do, which is to trace the relationship between the individual and society, to put a very personal narrative against a background of social panorama, and this is a tradition of writing which we have very strong examples of in English in particular. The ghost of Dickens hanging over everything that we write still, 150 years later. So yeah, I mean, the passage I read just then is probably the passage that does that most directly and most obviously in this book, but it is always there in the background, and indeed, without wanting to give too much away, the economic situation which Max both doesn't really understand and is not really interested in is part of his undoing at the end. He thinks he can ignore it, and in fact it intersects with his life quite dramatically.
Yes, yes. Well, there are also other things, of course. You could call it, in a sense, the portrait of an era again, because it's about internet, it's about Facebook, it's about CCTV, it's about GPS, the global positioning system we all know as TomTom. And that all has to do something with the privacy in the title, the loss of privacy in our present day world, in a sense, and then the other way, the complete impossibility to make real human contact. So in that sense, it's not only about the credit crunch, to put it down to that, but it's also about our present day life again. And it seems to me, that's what I was aiming at here, that you seem to have some critical distance to how the world is developing, not only in this book, but in the other books as well.
One of the things I like to do in my books is to trace the way not just that the characters and the protagonists change, but the way that society changes in the background at the same time. The most obvious example of that, I suppose, is the dichotomy between the Rotters Club and the Closed Circle, and the way that the characters live different kind of lives in the 1970s and the early noughties. But that's slightly problematic at the moment, because to my eyes, at least, British society hasn't changed that drastically in the last few years. And really, in terms of the economic direction of the country, it hasn't really changed since the Thatcher era. So, looking at those kind of political changes as a possible backdrop to the novel, I felt it was very hazy. I felt it was hard really to get a grip on anything. But what was immediately obvious was that huge technological changes had taken place in that era, and huge changes in the way that human beings connect with each other. And we now find ourselves with more ways of keeping in contact with each other than we ever had before. And the question that I wanted to raise in this novel, because as I hinted before, it's a book that tries to raise questions rather than provide answers, is whether those connecting technologies really connect us or bring us further apart. Certainly in the case of Maxwell Sim, a man who is, for most of the novel, intensely lonely, that loneliness is really only intensified by the awareness that that he has this myriad of ways of connecting with other people, and actually there's nobody out there listening to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he has 74 friends on Facebook, but none of them ever post on his wall. He comes back from a trip away for 3 weeks and finds 137 emails in his inbox, but they're all telling him that his penis is too small and this is how he can enlarge it. And his wife, who has left him, will barely speak to him on the telephone, so he finds that the best way to get into a dialogue with her is to log on to the message board that she frequents on the internet and pose as a woman and get into a relationship with her that way, which to his amazement he finds after just a few exchanges is a deeper and closer relationship than he ever had with her when he was married to her. And you know, these kind of paradoxes are all around us now, I think. And that, I mean, that one is an example of an instance where actually maybe the technology does bring us closer, and the two people on opposite sides of the world typing at each other on a keyboard can be closer than two people who've been married for 20 years and share a bed every night.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In a sense, I also got the feeling that all these this technology is in some sort of metaphor for the way you look at relationship between people anyway, even before it was there. I mean,
well, Max as a person is predisposed to being disconnected from people, and the reason for that, as you discover at the end of the book, is that he's actually disconnected from himself and hasn't really understood himself for the whole of his life. And I think that, he realises, is the reason that all these relationships have failed up to that point.
But isn't that a problem of most of your main characters?
Yes, it probably is.
Yeah.
It probably is. So you've identified a recurring theme there. Well done.
Thank you. But still, I want to go back to when I try to sneak in this critical attitude towards the world. I mean, well, I can't use the word satirical anymore, but in a way, I got the feeling that the novelist himself is actually mad about what's going on, angry about what's going on, angry about what Blair did to Labour, for instance.
You picked up that from this book?
No, not from this book. No,
but
from the rest of you.
Yeah, from the Close Circle.
The Close Circle, for instance. This last thing from the Close Circle.
Well, let me ask you a question as a fellow novelist. Why would you write a novel if you were satisfied with the world? Why would you write if you thought the world was hunky-dory? There would be no point.
No, that's true. But is the novel the right thing to use to voice that sort of criticism?
I don't think we.
Is it fruitful?
I don't think we choose our means of expression. I think they choose us. And you know, perhaps we shouldn't come to the ending of this book too soon. We shouldn't ejaculate prematurely on this particular occasion. But certainly, when you get to the very last chapter of this book, you find that question raised very, very directly. And there is a kind of howl of authorial dissatisfaction about the artifact that has just been created, actually, and that the author and readers have just shared together. So, you know, I think there's always been a vein of self-consciousness and self-criticism in my books, which manifests itself in the use of certain kind of quasi-experimental devices, which you mentioned in your introduction, such as that huge sentence at the end of the Rotters Club. And I think probably in Maxwell's Sin this rises to the surface more explicitly and more unavoidably than in any of the other books.